Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month, we begin a new theme, is One More Day, Tribute to Recovery and World Suicide Day. It says month on the back, but there's a day in September where we recognize those who completed suicide and how much all those who are still here. I want to just mention a few stats. 800,000 people complete suicide each year on average. 107,000 drug overdoses deaths in the United States during 2021 increased nearly 15% from 93,000. Today, we have a new guest. I've been waiting to see him for some time. Soslan, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your insight. I kind of rushed ahead. I was going to have this one quote, which I think is important, from Juliet Lewis. It says, "The bravest thing I ever did was continuing my life when I wanted to die." It is something that's messy, that, being in the faith-based community, but also just being in the community of people, humans, understanding that there's so much ripple effects when there is this kind of loss. And I just want to say thank you, Soslan, for joining us, joining the discussion. It is messy, but I think the discussion part of it is where some of the healing happens.
Yep. And see, one of the things, as a person that works with people that have, with families, it's just so devastating to work with families. And I started, a matter of fact, the Suicide Prevention Month, I started a program called the Pass It On program, which is a suicide prevention program. And I think I sent it to you in my bio, where I talked about how, we need to put that extra time and effort and showing compassion and caring, because we're in this generation where it's all about me. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And in the Bible, it tells us to look out for one another, hold each other accountable, lift up each other as brothers and sisters, and as Jesus would. So why not do the same? And that's why I came up with the idea. Hey, you know what? Let me make a positive impact on the armed forces, because during that time I was kind of low end of my life, because I failed HVAC. And I didn't know what to do, and I was very distraught by it. And so what happened was since I was distraught by it, I'm like, okay, what can I do to help others? Because I don't want to be trapped in this divot. So then I ended up breaking the tie, because most people that do fail HVAC, you're given two options in the Air Force. Number one, you have to wait for about 3 months, and then you go in front of a board. During that 3 months, you're doing whatever the Air Force tells you, and sometimes it's enjoyable, sometimes it's not. But then once that board comes up, then they look back on the 3 months and say, okay, why do we want you to here? Why do you still think you should be here? Or what do you think are going to contribute to the Air Force? Well, I changed that up for the first time. During those 3 months, I worked really tirelessly, networking, and being able to bring back the suicide prevention program and the letter campaign. And we were able to bring bridges together, and we had different from all ranks. Once a month, we'd do a massive barbecue. So it showed the other side, showed the other lower ranks that, hey, you know what, we care about you. We're just like you. We're not and so then we also had the letter campaign, which was the second aspect of it, we had kids, grade schools, high schools, people from across America would write to our troops and say, hey, you know what, we care about you. That's a positive impact, and you wouldn't believe how a big of an impact that has made on lives. And this kind of a policy went through 30 different bases, and it's changed and saved hundreds of lives. And that's what this suicide prevention program was about.
That's wonderful. And a lot of
Yeah.
times, strength and muscling it through. A lot of times is not all we have. A lot of times, that is probably some of the most lonely, discouraging times when you're trying to do those things alone. And bringing people together. I want to just share with this before we continue. 988 is a new suicide crisis lifeline. I know that they're establishing that in the U.S. But what I want to encourage those around the world to find what resources are there, resources and what works, what helps you along the way is vital to do the research, educate yourself, know what's out there, what helps you. I tell Soslan, I always say, I don't work in the mental health field. I don't like to reinvent the wheel. So if you are faith-based and you want to be part of that again, I want to help you along that way, so get connected with your community. One thing that sometimes happens, like you were sharing the positive aspect, sometimes this one quote, I know people say it better than me. Alice Walker says the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. This is a quote. I want to hear from you. What comes to mind when you hear this? And then we'll probably segue, because with my new guests, I like them to kind of share their story. How did you get where you are today? So first, the quote.
So that quote, the most common way people give up in power is by thinking they don't have any. The interesting part is that I didn't think I had that much power, or that power, and by the strength that God has given me when I failed the HVAC. I'm thinking, okay, you know what? I guess I can't make it, because I thought when I joined the HVAC and stuff and joined the tech school, I was going to make a positive impact. I was something, and I was somebody. But now, because I failed HVAC and because I was in this waiting area, I thought, well, I have no worth value anymore. All I'm just doing is eating 3 meals a day and getting closer to the exit door. That's all I'm waiting for. So and it seemed like I didn't have any strength or any drive. So that's what I'm thinking. And that's what broke that divot. And that's why I'm like, you know what? No, I do have it. It's called relying on God and relying on prayer and relying in the men's Bible study on base. That's what got me through it.
And that's wonderful, finding that. Sometimes, a lot of times, we give away our validation to something else, and it's not very wise practice if I have so many variables for me to be validated, because it doesn't always work out the best. When you can kind of internalize it and kind of understand that your value doesn't stem from some other situation, it stems from you building yourself. We're human, we make mistakes, we learn, we grow. And like you said in the beginning, it's about me. But I feel a lot of society today, there's this enoughness, this idea that I'm not only enough if I have this. And you kind of see in social media, everyone's on vacation, Soslan. I'm not. But the thing about it is, it's unrealistic. And it's not really telling the story. Remember, I don't know if you know the Pratt study, that we are more approachable when we kind of share a little bit of our flaws. If someone's always perfect, it's like, well, I'm not there yet. Yeah, I feel like when in a community that can kind of share a little bit, I feel that has been helpful. I want to go right to you. I want to segue to your story. I know a lot of people you're new to the podcast, and I love to give an opportunity to my new guests to just share where you were, what brought you to where you are today. Go ahead, Soslan. This floor is yours.
Okay. So my name is, so I kind of want to correct. So Soslan, Soslan.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. A lot of people butcher my name. I was actually born from Russia. And I was born from Russia, came to America in 2006. And it's interesting. I should have not been here, actually, because it ended up being a rescue mission. And when I came to America, the first family that came there to Russia, they came for one girl, but then the orphanage is like, take as many kids as you can. So they took back 4 boys and 3 girls. And if we would have stayed there 2 hours after we left, I would not be here talking with you, because the orphanage got bombed. Everybody, over dozens of people died, and I could have been one of them. And if you even look back even further, I should have not been in that orphanage, because back I was at a certain age where I should have been in the Moscow army or Moscow military, making weapons for the Russian military. And because of my poor health and because of my deteriorating body and stuff, I was then kept hidden in the orphanage for that duration of time. So you can see the hand of God working throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came to America in 2006. I was adopted again to a family in 2008. I was adopted by a pastor and a choir director. And so throughout high school or throughout grade school, I was bullied, and I was because of where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to a point where I'm like, okay, you know what, this is not enjoyable anymore. So it got to a point where I can make it day by day, because if I can't give up now, because if I do, what if I would have given up in Russia? You know, what happens if I didn't eat that garbage, or what happens if I didn't fight hard enough when I was in Russia, or that I wouldn't be alive, or where would I be today? So I persevered through that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I went through and I joined the cross country, and it was very evident. You can see that playing out very well in when I joined the cross country, and how on my podcast, I talk about how joining cross country forever changed my life, because it gave me a whole new, different perspective on the path that God has set for us.
Mm.
And I'm going to get to that, and that's what made start my podcast as well. So I joined cross country in 6th grade. I was dead last for every single race.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so frustrated at myself. I'm like, okay, why am I dead last? Why can't I run fast enough? So I said, okay, you know what? I have to work hard for it. I have to be persistent. I have to do something, not just rely on other people and rely on, oh, well, great job. You tried anyway, but you came short,
Mm.
So I worked my tail end off during that summer. 7th grade, I was in the middle of the pack. 8th grade, I worked another summer of tirelessly running and getting fit and stuff. I pretty much won, if not most of my races, 8th grade, and set records. And then I worked really hard, because I said, you know what, I want to have a goal. And I had that vision, or the vision of, and the good habit of becoming going on the cross country team on varsity for high school. And so then I worked really hard, and then I was one of the few freshmen that got on the varsity cross country team, which was very good at that time, if you're in high school. And so then throughout high school and stuff, I had sat on varsity for 4 years. But the fact that I never gave up, and I always fought, and I've always worked hard, and I've given all this attributes and all my sweat and energy to something I love. But one thing though I can't forget, and Taylor, is I tend to, and I have to kind of mess up this when I talk about it's God. God has been with me through all my life. God has been, and it took me forever to truly find that out, because I was one of those Christians where I'm like, oh yeah, like one of those church Christians. I would go to church on Sunday, and I'm like a Christian, but it didn't really hit me until later on in life. And so, in high school and stuff, I'd say, okay, you know what, I did my thing. When the gifts, the talents, it was God that gave me the gifts and the talents. So now it's paying off. So I graduated high school, and after graduating high school, I joined the United States Air Force, and that's where it forever changed my life. Now that's where it talked. That's where it really pushed on a brand new set of stress, and a brand new of the world, and how when you really go outside the state or the county you live in, you meet all different sorts of people. And especially if you go overseas, you truly meet all different people of all different walks of life. And sometimes you're not liked, sometimes you're liked and stuff. So it varies. So it got to a point, and in my military, I went and graduated tech school. I went back to Lackland, and it was during Shafford Air Force Base where we kind of touched base on it, where I started a suicide prevention program called the Pass It On Movement. And we just brushed it over in the beginning. And I went back to Lackland, where I graduated with a fleet management analysis technical degree. And so then I was on my way to Japan. And when I was in Japan and stuff, it was very frustrating. Because I was bullied because of where I came from, and I was harassed, and it was the worst time of my life. And as a matter of fact, I cried every single time I went home. I cried. I said, why did I join the military if I was going to be treated like this? It was absolutely miserable. And I could see how, if you're not a person of faith, if you do not have God to help you along the way, I could see why the military leads to suicide. I could see why the military has multiple suicides a day, because they don't have the faith aspect, and they don't truly have that walk in relationship with God. And so it really changed. And so then, my walk with God started strengthening a little bit, because it was stating, okay, you know what, that's pretty much who all I have to hang on to. That's who's with me at all times, is God. And so I got involved in 3 different churches, overall 2 off base, 1 on base, and multiple Christian organizations, off base and on base. And tell you the truth, it's the church community and it's the Christian friends and families that I surrounded myself that got me through the major illness on October 2nd at 8:30 after leading the Bible study. I became paralyzed from the neck down. And I definitely can tell you that changed my life literally forever. And I can say I was literally a born again Christian. And I understood a brand new relationship that God has set for us and the brand new path that God has set for us. Because when you are paralyzed and there's no really a cause to it, that tells you something. And I believe it was God giving me a wake up call. And it was interesting because that's all I was relying on was my church friends and church family to help me along the way, even in the hospital, to provide me peace and comfort and all that. And truly, I wanted to make a positive impact. I said, you know what? I don't want people being alone. If the nurses are alone, if the nurses are having a bad day, because the nurses were busy, especially overseas, they were busy. So what happened was I turned on my iPhone and I played the Japanese Bible in my Bible, but in Japanese. And it was so cool, the interaction. The nurses would come by and they'd start tearing up. And they said that's Psalms 45. That's one precise, and she gave her life to Christ because she heard Psalms 45. How cool is that? And two, that I was able, God was allowed me to minister to people while I was being pretty much almost paralyzed from the neck down in a country that suppresses Christians because they're mostly Buddhists, they're mostly Hindus and stuff. So it's the Christian faith is a minority, and if you speak of God, you were pretty much hazed at work and it was really bad for you. So I gave God for that because I give him thanks for that. And so then when I went back to America, I was medevaced back to America, and from there I took some long time to get into acute rehab facility, where I was able then to start a ministry called Remember God Loves You, and I'll meet you at the finish line. Now that's a podcast. It went into a podcasting, but the reason why that started off was because when I could start getting better, I would wheel around in people's rooms, and I would pray, and I would say, hey, provide them peace and comfort, because I knew how it felt being alone. And I definitely can tell you, when you are alone, that's when Satan plays with you. That's where he entrenches that kind of a mindset, thinking, okay, well, you know what, my family's left and stuff now, I'm back in I'm left alone, no one's really here to visit me. And even for older people, that are nearing death and stuff, they're well, I'm here because, I fell and I can't get back up, and there's not going to be hope getting better, so why try anyway? Or they had one bad day of physical therapy, and they can't, and they're distraught about it. So I wanted to make a change on that. So I was able to go and impact lives as well. And one of the coolest God moments that God allows us to is when doctors and nurses come to Christ. And they come up to you and say, hey, Sos, can we do communion with you? And I said, absolutely. Do you have crackers or do you have water? It could be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be bread or wine or bread or grape juice. That's so cool when nurses and doctors come up to you and they just are teary-eyed and you see a new Christian being born literally right in front of you. And so I said, okay, what can I do with that? So then I'm like, okay, there's got to be some people that, much more than the impact I've already made. Now, okay, I prayed to God. I'm like, okay, God, what can you do for me? How can I be a servant unto you? So then I was allowed to start doing a podcast on Facebook. That later was censored because when you're born from Russia, that again follows you. And God closed that door, but opened up another door through Spotify. And now the podcast is in 19 different countries, and it's flourishing. And it's allowing people to hear the gospel that normally don't tend to. And that is so cool that can happen. And, and overall, I believe that God that healed me, and that I was healed and I'm back up to full capacity. And it shows you a true testament that God does walk alongside with you. He does send angels. He's a peace. He's a comforter, and he loves you and he cares for you and he wants what's best for you. And there are times when we walk on the path that he has set for you where it's not all rainbows and roses. And this is a kind of typical stereotype of where Christians think, okay, well, if I accept Jesus Christ, that means everything will be great, and that it will be rainbows and flowers. But it's not, because the first encounterings they have, the first snowstorm they encounter, or the first rainstorm, or the first hurricane they encounter, what happens to them normally? They tend to walk away because they get mad at God, because they're like, well, God, I thought you were walking alongside with me. What happened? Because normally you're not a God that does that. But we live in a sinful world, and God is perfect, and that He puts us through different situations to strengthen our relationship with Him. So we have to rely upon Him. So we have those humble moments where we get on our knees and plead God to help us to get along, because we're at a point where we can't see in front of us whatsoever, and that we need His light and His hand along the way.
It's just hearing your story. Healing can come in various ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And going to scripture just briefly, Jesus came down to serve, not to be served. One thing I know, even my journey, which is similar in one aspect that you were saying, is my healing became from helping others. My serving others became my recovery.
Yep.
And I see you doing that today. And I know for me, those who are listening, everyone's on the journey. I'm sure you understand that, especially when it comes to the faith journey. The one positive thing is when it is positive, when it isn't, if you do this, if you don't do this, it's more about becoming something better. And that's what I love about the faith, at least the perspective. Unfortunately, people try to hedge their bets when it comes to faith. Like you mentioned briefly, like, it reminds me of Job, the book of Job, and how all the friends were around him just trying to assess what he did in his that caused this. So a lot of times it's easy to villainize situations, villainize people, villainize groups, but the idea is that we're all human trying to make this journey. It's wonderfully positive when you're doing it not for your own gain, but outwardly to the community. And at the very essence, whether you're faith-based or not, in the Bible, that really speaks to me is that we are called to reach out to others. We're not called to keep it to ourselves. So whatever is positive to our community that could bring us together as opposed to push us apart, I am so for. At the same time, I know, just to be frank, a lot of churches unfortunately has hurt people, and at the same time, because the aspect that people don't realize is that they're people there. And is when we were able to effectively communicate, when we understand that if you look at it as a biblical side, we were pushed out of Eden, right? Which means that this was going to be hard. Like you did cross country. I did a little cross country myself when I was in element and middle school. And I remember waking up and doing those runs, and you're like, this is going to suck. You kind of prepare yourself. But sometimes we kind of get mediocre. I feel like maybe you felt this way too.
Or
you go to church, complacent. You go get complacent in church. You're overly, I just follow the rules, everything. But things are not black and white. We can't hedge our bets for us to make the uncertainty less. I feel it's really inspiring to hear that you're truly outward centered in your approach, in your faith, in how you approach people around you in the community. And I feel that's where healing can come in various ways.
Yeah, because it seems like, if you look at these churches and stuff, and here's where I kind of very distraught, and here's where it's kind of like a little bit upsetting. Is that you have these churches stating that, well, okay, we're going to be here. Like, for instance, these mega churches. I harp on mega churches. Joel Osteen, for instance, his church, and Benny Hinn's church, because they're like, well, we're going to heal you, like the prosperity faith, or like these big churches that have like multiple pastors. Well, they're like, oh yeah, we can, if you guys need help, if you guys are like in time of desperate need and stuff, you can give us a call anytime. But then once you are in that desperate time and stuff, well, you're left on your own by the church, because the church is like, oh, well, we don't have like people, like, because they're busy and stuff. And like, well, what happened? And that's where, and I can see how that's where, I can see your viewpoint of where like the church is kind of leave them on their high tide, and that's not supposed to be it. The church is supposed to be like surrounding ourselves during troubled times. The church is supposed to be like when something does happen to your family, you have prayer warriors immediately that come out to your house, or be able to say, hey, let's go for coffee right now, or let's meet somewhere let's meet at the church right away. It could be at 2 or 3 in the morning, because we're here for you. That's what God wanted. God didn't want like, oh, yep, you got all right, 10 o'clock. You can't call me at 10 o'clock, but and then it's got like 8 to 10. No, that's not what it's about. Because how are we supposed to make a positive impact, and how are we supposed to like impact people's walk? Because I say this, that God puts certain people in our lives. It's either a time or a season. He puts pastors in for a time or a season, and I believe that God, like, when you interact and when there's no coincidence, it's all God. And for instance, if God wants to like have a positive impact and you reach out to that pastor and stuff, you get a little bit upset because you're like, oh man, he was supposed to be there. And then you hear what the pastor did. Apparently he was like at a party, at a Super Bowl party. That's so discouraging. And they're like, well, you didn't call between my window. You didn't call my secretary. No, that's completely opposite. And that's why, you have to have like smaller churches. I'm a huge advocate of smaller churches, because that's where you see healing going on. You see healing and you see lives being changed for the good, and even around the community as well.
I want to, I could speak about just how complex church settings could be. Someone could be a family member, could be in may be cured from cancer. They're in remission, and then another church member in the same congregation just lost someone in their family and if the leaders in that church don't recognize or even know these people who have lost, the dynamic is very complicated, because you got to know the people that you're there serving.
Bingo.
And so someone's good news is someone's bad news. It's just highly complex when it comes to that. And I just want to, there's this word in Hindi. My wife has untranslatable words, but I do like what it says. It's ensuring that it's a definition, ensuring things happen even with minimal resources. A lot of times when it comes to recovery, when it comes to this stuff, we don't have all the resources up front. We don't have the people. And I feel it's knowing self, and I feel with faith it does that grounded approach. You get the foundation of what your purpose is, purpose driven. And I remember preaching in my church before, and I used to ask the question, can you go to a mission trip without a camera? Could you could you, a lot of times in churches there's a competition, like you look to the left, they didn't do what I did last weekend, so I'm just not going to do anything. And that complacency can become corrosive, because it's not about that at all.
No. And it's also become like a competition. Like, well, this church went to the Super Bowl. Well, we got to go to a FIFA competition. or even comes down to the basic. Or for instance, well, this person, their Sunday school went to do their Sunday school went to a nursing home. Okay, well, we're going to go to 2 nursing homes. And so it's become that, and then the faith aspect has become like more distorted. And that faith aspect now, that church has become more of a competition. And that's not what church is meant for. If you go to a nursing home, if you go to like 1 or 2 nursing homes, like as a church, that should be good, because that should come from the heart. That should be genuine. Not, well, we're doing it because we got to do it for the paper and we got to compete against a next door church down the street. No, that's what it's not. That's a heart of pride, and that's a heart of like attention. And God, and I personally tell you that bothers me, because we do have churches that do that. And it's like, well, how are you doing it authentic? Because now when you speak with people, and especially when you do hospice ministry and when you do ministry and stuff, you can tell people which are authentic. And a lot of Christians can see it. True Christians can see, okay, are you being authentic when you work? Are you being authentic anyway? You're not being recognized, and you don't have to have a camera right there and then. And it's authenticity. I can't say that word, but it's authentic. You gotta be compassionate. You gotta be caring, and you can't see that if you're always with that camera, and if you're always like saying, oh, we gotta get in the paper. We gotta say we're the better church. That's wrong.
Yeah, and I feel also just to say that when you're doing things for others, not there's that sense of connection and conversation we're having right now. When you can have 100 people, a lot of people around, but when I'm talking to you, Soslan, is that correct, Soslan?
Yep, Soslan.
Then I'm just talking to you.
Yeah,
like you got like being really present with that individual. So I feel that ability to be effective in communication is sometimes getting harder to find. And
Yeah.
I want to just ask you. Obviously, we can always say, that churches they have struggles because there's people. I think the biggest thing I did say, situations, contexts, cultures are complex, and we could agree on that. But the
Yep.
reasons why we do it is simple. You get what I'm saying? The reasons why we care about this stuff, why we want to serve others, are simple, but the context around it may be complicated. But I want to ask you, you shared your story. I want to ask you this question. Your journey, there was barriers. Obviously, it felt like there were barriers. There was scarcity of support. You mentioned what did help. You mentioned what did help, but what did not help? I want to just kind of.
That's a good. I like that question. So I mentioned what did help through that journey. I also want to tell you that, and even with my setting up my ministry called Remember God Loves You and stuff. I mean, it's so easy to talk about the people. Well, here's what helped, and here's what got along the ways. It's so easy to talk about that, but it's harder to talk about what did not help. Those barriers. So the barriers that did not help are other. You'd be surprised. It's other church leaders. For instance, I was in San Antonio, Texas, and we went to a Pentecostal church. And I said, hey, I was wondering, what is your thoughts if I were to start this ministry and stuff? Well, the pastor's like, he's like, I tell you when to start the ministry. You don't start the ministry without my acknowledgement. And I'm like, but I'm not even part of your church,
Yeah.
And then another instance is that, you start the ministry, you start doing the video podcast and stuff, and then you get removed from a church. The church board meets together, and then they vote you out, like out of the blue. And then you get a phone call from one of the high church, the elders, and say, oh yeah, by the way, you're no longer, we voted you out. So we pretty much kicked you out. And you're like, but are we in this together? I thought we were doing this together. So that's what did not help with that. And then another thing is, along with my journey, like that's within the church aspect to start my ministry. But another thing that did not help is people like trying to undermine you and discredit you. Even when you start a suicide prevention program, those people of leadership, for instance, when I would speak and kind of say, lay out the game plan, and I would have like a PowerPoint slide, and I would have everything else set up, and I did all my homework, and I did the stats. And I had this one leader, this senior master sergeant. He's like, why are you really doing this? It's like, I think you're doing this because you're trying to get attention, you're trying to get the limelight, you're trying to do all this. And I didn't like that, because he was thinking I was doing it for self gains. And it was hard for him, because I knew that they would all come at a later vote. And it was another leader that they worked together as well. And those two made sure that whatever the process was slowed down so it wouldn't get passed at all. So, I mean, at the end of the day, those three came up, and it was about out of 21 people that on base and stuff, we had 7 that voted against it. Those are the 7 people that ratted and just made my life miserable and stuff. But see, and it's those, and for me, the sad part is that I have a tendency of thinking, okay, what did I do wrong? What did I say? What did I do? What were my actions? And I would backtrack, and I would get like so down on myself. So it's more of a psychological impact that they cause. And it's those barriers that tend to us, it's those barriers that makes a psychological breakdown for us, where we can't handle ourselves anymore. And this, for instance, we look at, when I was in the Air Force, we had this one gal, her son got killed by a drunk driver. And she went to this commander, and she's like, hey, you know what? I'm going through a hard time, I've lost everything, and because we have an open door policy. And the sad part is that the commander, he didn't have the authentic, he wasn't being a commander, he wasn't being a leader of his flock. He's like, he had this quote, his exact words, he's like, and his actions, he's like, for the love of God, I know you're going to commit suicide, so we got 2 options. We got the rope right here, and we got the bottle pills. And he's like, can you commit suicide in the women's bathroom, so I wouldn't have to like call the hazmat suit crew in, because I had to call them 6 times this week, that kind of thing. And he was one that made, at Yokota Air Force Base, he made it impossible for me to start the suicide prevention program, because of his lack of leadership and because of his lack of authenticity. And he could care less, and I would say he was more prideful and arrogant. The sad part is is that with that staff sergeant that's been in 18 years, she did jump off a bridge and she did commit suicide that following night. And it was heartbroken because I felt like, man, we could imagine if that would have, and he prolonged it, because if that suicide prevention program would have started, she wouldn't be in that situation. She would have gotten help, and she would have gotten like family and Christian organizations to surround herself with. And see, that's what frustrated me about it. And that's what did not help in my journey and stuff. And another thing is, it was my first sergeant when I was in the hospital. And I was in the hospital, and I could barely talk, and I didn't understand a single thing what the Japanese hospital had to say. And this was so discouraging by far. And he's like, well, I asked for a translator. He's like, well, why would I give you a translator? You know, you're not going to make it anyway, so you're not going to understand a single thing, so there's no worth, don't even spend time giving us a translator, giving you an English translator. That was absolutely discouraging. You know, because how, as a person that just got paralyzed, as a person that's body's shutting down on themselves, you're thinking, okay, great, I'm in a hospital in a random country all by myself with nobody there, and that's how my help goes and says, well, whoop, your guests are not going to help anymore. So that was very discouraging. That's what did not help. So I've mentioned a couple of them. Sorry about taking it.
No. It's it's unfortunate, just hearing. I can't imagine just being, a lot of times when you're trying. Well, at least from my experience, I even tell, because I work in the mental health field. When you're in the thick of it, sometimes there's this tendency to over-explain and to people. You try to convince them of what you're trying to do, and the problem a lot of times happens is, I hate to say it, they won't get it. They won't get it, and that harsh reality. Sometimes I try to help my clients, or even people I know, get to terms with that, because we waste a lot of time when we try to get people to know what we're going through or what we're trying to do. The fact of the matter is, like you said before, and like I've said too, is that it comes from you. Your choice. The choice is yours. And I feel when you're able to make those steps, and faith, I'm prone to faith, and just like you have shared, because one thing about faith, at least from my perspective, God doesn't change, which is comforting. Everything around us changes. Yeah, and if you're just looking at a bit more basic, you have friendships when you're in elementary that you no longer probably talk to. You have friends, you have family members that maybe not over here anymore. I have friends who completed suicide. Things continue changing. The holidays are extremely hard for many because of not of the holidays, but the people who are not there with them in the holidays.
Or it's not like even the passing away of family members either. It's because of the divisiveness of this generation, and it's gotten a lot worse. For instance, when your own family isolates you because you think one way or the other, that hurts. That's another thing that I've noticed as working in the ministry field. And you get so many people like, well, why are they like not hanging out with me anymore? Why don't I get invited to chicken barbecues, or why don't I get invited to family reunions? Because I think one way. See, and I tell them, like, well, you can have all that, but you know what the really cool part is? Who doesn't always change? Whose promise is always there? It's God's. That His promise, thinking that when you cross that finish line, you get to run into His arms, and you get to hear Him say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." That is a promise that He has set for you. And another thing is, He loves you. He cares for you. That's a thing that will never change.
I want to just ask you one last question. Any pivotal, you mentioned a lot, but any milestones, even just one or lesson that helped propel you to where you are today, to those listening, what would you say to them?
So one big milestone of my life. One milestone of my life is really starting this Christian podcast, really finding out, okay, how can I make an impact? And just seeing, I'm like, okay, because a lot of us think, okay, you know what? A lot of us are like, okay, well, I'm gonna share the word of God. I'm gonna get out as much as I can. But really, really going on, going behind the mic and going all that. A lot of people are thinking, well, that's not very much to it. Well, to me, it takes a lot, because I have to pray, and it takes time, and it takes spiritual growth, and it's also because you get to grow in that too. You get to grow from God's walk. So that's one of my major milestones in my lessons, or major milestones, is really starting this Christian podcast of Remember God Loves You, Not Me, the finish line, because it allows me now, because now it tells me that, okay, you know what? God is working in through somebody. If I can touch somebody's life, one life, then I did my job as a disciple of Christ. And that's what he tells us, and he instructs us to. He doesn't instruct us to say, hey, you know what? Well, when you go, when you pray and stuff, make sure you pray for somebody that's like, you go out and purposely look that somebody's crying. You pray over them. No, he's like, just do it out of the blue. Just do it out of your heart. Don't do it just because you want to. No, I don't do the podcast because I got to get all the publicity and I got to get everything else. No, because I do it on my heart, because I want to make somebody's impact. And another thing is, if I can make somebody's day like happy or great, I did my job as well. Because I don't like when people are discouraged or sad.
Yeah. Before I started this podcast, I started in 2019 in the, I think, November or October, November was the first few episodes. Before that, I actually did events in Florida, like in the churches. And and the funny thing was, I was kind of nervous doing the podcast. I was nervous because for me, I'm like, well, I'm not having the interaction. I had a gaming headset. I just didn't have all the equipment. You could easily talk yourself out. I remember.
Bingo.
Yeah. One thing I remember talking to, whenever I was a first elder in the church before, and I remember I used to say to all the elders who were there, I'm like, I've been alive less time that you read the Bible, so the other thing I also understand is not being really appreciated, not really, like, my vision was kind of very skewed because I was not a Christian coming up, and I have nothing against for me, I really commend those who were brought up in the church, just because there's a lot of complexities. A lot of my friends are all surrounded by it, because it's just easier when we have like-minded in that positive way. But when it comes to, there are moments, I'll tell you, Soslan, that I remember doing this. My whole thing was the subjects that no one talks about, like suicide, mental health, the messy stuff that kind of gets swept under and gets kind of a complacent view. It's kind of like these talking points approach in churches and with the church leaders. I had these events, and I would say most people didn't come from my church a lot of times, but most people from the community came, and I loved it. I loved that connection. When I started the podcast, I want to share this because I asked myself very much, because there's a lot of people who want to share the word, and obviously the word means a lot to me, but I feel for me, my purpose was a little bit different. I treat this like a medical missionary, my podcast, because I feel providing a safe place for us to continue the discussion. I want to inspire hope. Now, I don't proselytize, but I do encourage faith. I encourage that because I know it's positive. I encourage people to share their stories, and at the very least continue the dialogue, so we don't just sit here and say this doesn't happen. We don't avoid messy, complicated, hurt things, because we know that avoidance doesn't help ever. No. So I want to ask you, as we wrap up, it's been wonderful talking to you, Soslan. Any final thoughts? And also, I want to share with those listening all the links, anything that Soslan, you want to share, I'll put it in the notes for those watching. And
absolutely.
To link you to your podcast if you want to see more of that. Any final thoughts you would like to share with those listening today?
So my final thoughts are, I know we are in uncertain times. I know that, we as brothers and sisters in Christ, I know that there are times we're thinking, like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen with my kids? What's going to happen next generation? What's going to happen? Or am I going to be okay? Am I not going to lose my job? Or, what's going to happen? But I just want to tell you that when we go through those times, don't give up hope. And now that's a lot easier said than done. Trust me, it is. But, really hold on to the fact that God has got you, and that vision of crossing the finish line, and that faith, and knowing that, you might have all these circumstances happen to you, but at the same time, you never know what kind of a life you're impacting as well. You look at somebody else's. I go back to Job. Think of the people that Job has impacted. Now, around them. For instance, Joe might have lost his wife, so a lot of people are looking at to him and say, okay, how do you handle that? And think of the ministry he's done by that, and how it's like, okay, if that man is committed, then I can be doing the same. Or if this family, if my next door neighbor who lost their daughter in a drunk driving thing, if they're steadfast in the faith, there's something that they have that I want, and that is a relationship with God. So I just want to give encouragement. Don't lose faith and hope. It's so easy to do in this in this day and age, because it's so easy to go back and say, oh, you know what, poor me, or well, I've gone through so much. I guess there's not really anyone to help me, but there is Christian podcasting, and there's churches that can walk alongside with you, and there's also prayer, and that time in worship with God, who can just bring a sense of peace over your mind and over your body as well.
Yeah, I also just want to piggyback by saying, get to know yourself. It's funny to say that. Get to know yourself, because then you'll make choices for you, not have other people make them for you. I think when we start to grasp that, and kind of, like I said before, the situation may be complicated, circumstances may be complicated, may be hurtful or hard, but the reasons why we do it is simple. We want to feel like we want to be happy. We want to serve others. We're connected beings. Even if we're introverted, we're not islands. And I want to thank you again, Soslan, for being patient. I know we've been trying to connect, but part of the discussion it's wonderful to hear all these perspectives and all these inspiring stories, but always moving forward. Thank you so much, Soslan.
Oh, absolutely. And if anyone wants to follow, so I have I'm on Spotify. Remember God Loves You, and I'll meet you at the finish line. Or if you just want to, if that's too long of a title, just put SOSLAN into your search engine, and then, excuse me, and then you're gonna find a picture of me or something like that, and that's gonna be my podcast. Remember God Loves You, and I'll meet at the finish line. You can also follow me on Facebook. Remember Soslan Temanson, SOSLAN, where I also post other things on Facebook that's encouraging and words of encouragement and stuff. And also on Instagram, and I'm on Google Podcasts and Podbean, and there will be on the link below. And
all the links will be below. Those who are listening, you click them, you could check it out. Thank you again, Soslan. I want to also remind those who are watching, who are listening, you can go to ReviveMinstriesFL.com to see all the updates. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries Podcast. Leaving with this last quote. It's from F. Scott Fitzgerald. Never confuse a single defeat with a final defeat.
So I just want to say, remember, guys, God loves you, and I'll meet you at the finish line, and have a blessed day.